Now, there's a second reason that I don't think Brian knew, because I don't think anybody knew, that book really hit home, which was it sounds tangential to this story, but it becomes highly related. At the beginning of end of my third year of medical school, I'm going to the gym one day, riding my bike, as I always do. I get to the gym, I get off my bike, go to lock it up, and I was like, my back really hurts. Like, really hurt. Not like, oh, it's a little stiff. Like, something feels horrible. So I started walking down the steps to the gym, and I was like, not going to happen today. Like, I mean, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't tie my shoe. So I just went back, got on my bike, rode back to my apartment, told my roommate, I was like, hey man, I'm gonna go lay down upstairs. The next morning I woke up, I couldn't get out of bed. And to make a very long story short, over the next 2 weeks, I completely deteriorated. I was at the point where I could get in and go to the hospital, but I had to have the nurses. This is back in the Wild West days where you could just sort of get anything you needed at the pharmacy. I'd get nurses or residents to inject Toradol into me, which is a really strong NSAID. I could only sleep if I laid in an L shape over the nurse's station. And it just wasn't getting any better. And then one day, the pain changed immediately. I realized in retrospect what happened. A herniated disc had broken off, so the pain in my back dissipated, but now I had this, what turned out to be a 4-centimeter fragment sitting on my S1 nerve root. So now it felt like my left foot was being skinned from the bottom. But that was constant, so that was an unrelenting pain, and it could only be sort of brought under control if I could put my foot into a bag of ice, because then I could make my foot go numb, and then I could take some pain medicine. So this went on for another week, and then the dean of the medical school saw me limping through the hospital. He said, what's wrong? And I told him, and he dragged me down to the ER. We got an MRI that showed all of this, and I was in surgery the next morning. This was a Sunday night. Monday morning, I'm in the OR. It turned into a disaster. The guy who operated on me operated on the wrong side. So I woke up. The left issue was still present, but now I had what's called a foot drop on the right side. So foot drop is when the nerve that holds your foot up, which we take for granted when we walk, but if you don't have the ability to what's called dorsiflex, your foot would drop. You can't walk. You'll end up dragging your toe when you keep tripping. This story, I mean, we could spend 3 hours on the story because it's so idiotic. The punchline is I eventually needed many trips back to the operating room. This guy refused to believe there was anything wrong with me. It took another amazing doctor and neurologist to actually intervene on my behalf. And 3 months later, I'm unable to walk. I'm unable to do anything. My mom actually had to fly down from Toronto to look after me. And I'm sort of, you go through the checklist, right? So there's, I don't know if you've ever heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I don't think she's alive anymore, but she wrote a very famous book on the stages of dying. And it goes through like anger and denial and finally acceptance at the end, right? And so, bargaining, it's something that would make sense if you, and I'm sure I've
heard of that before. Yeah,
and you've probably watched it on really small scales.
Yeah.
Like in combat, you might see these things over the course of
compressed and dealt with it. Yeah.
And with a cancer patient, you might see this stretched out over a year. And so I was kind of going through this on my own, right? Where initially it was like, oh my God, what if I don't finish this rotation I'm doing right now, what's called a surgical sub-internship, to, oh, well, what if I don't graduate on time, to, well, what if I can't be a surgeon? And then it was, what if I don't walk ever again? So somewhere along the way, and I don't remember exactly when, probably like a month and a half into this, I finally caved in and started taking pain medicine.
I thought that's where the story was going. I was like, at some point, he's going to get on the opiates.
Yep. And I had been so reluctant to do so initially, been so stoic, just taking my NSAIDs and even using Benadryl, which is a horrible pain medication, of course, but it sedates you through some of the pain. And so I started taking Percocet. And Percocet is... it's typically 10 milligrams of oxycodone. So oxycodone is the fast-acting version, and it's stronger than, say, a Vicodin. So a Vicodin is Tylenol and hydrocodone, immediate acting, but hydrocodone is not as strong as oxycodone. So Percocet is stronger than Vicodin. They both have Tylenol. It's just the opiate is stronger. And so, if you take a Percocet, which would have 500 milligrams of Tylenol and 10 milligrams of oxycodone, I probably was taking, you start taking 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those a day, you develop a tolerance. And eventually, there's a longer acting version called OxyContin, which is just a time-released version of oxycodone. So then you would take that twice a day. So at my peak, I was probably taking 80 milligrams of OxyContin a day, plus another 120 milligrams of oxycodone. I just got rid of the Tylenol altogether. You can just get straight oxycodone. And so I'm about 200 milligrams a day of oxycodone equivalent. And again, if I took that today, I would just die. You just stop breathing. But at the time, you build up this tolerance. But there was this point where I realized that I wasn't just taking it for the physical pain, right? And I think this is the single most important insight I had, that when coupled with reading that book 6 months later was the single most important realization I ever had with respect to this problem, which was, at some point, I was just so depressed that I couldn't walk, and I was so worried that I'd never be able to do anything again, that at least the drug gave me a high that took me away from that. And so then it got to the point where I was just taking that drug all the time, and I just stopped engaging, wasn't engaged with anyone, anything. And then I sort of had this realization that was happening, and I was like, I want to stop. So at the time I was dating this girl, she was an anesthesiology resident. She was a few years older than me, just the coolest person. And I said to her, she was kind of the only one that knew what was going on. Because at the time, even the doctors who were prescribing this, this just wasn't on people's radar as a problem back then. I think today people would be like, homeboy's got 200 milligrams of OxyContin a day. That's probably not good. But at the time, it was just like Tic Tacs, right?
So that would legitimately kill, if I took 200 milligrams, that would really jack someone up?
I think if I took 200 today, I would stop breathing. Yeah, because that's how opiates kill you. They repress, they inhibit respiratory drive. That's what whenever someone overdoses on heroin, they just stop breathing. So yeah, I think 200 would. I don't know. I'd have to look at the pharmacopoeia. We
don't have to actually. I'll just take your word for it on this one. So the girl you're dating,
she said you can't just stop, right? The withdrawal is so painful that you have to taper off. You have to probably go on methadone, and then you'd have to start some pretty potent antidepressants, like MAOIs or TCAs. So you have to go on a drug like nortriptyline, which is in and of itself kind of a crazy thing. And I was like, yeah, but I think I'm just going to stop cold turkey. Now, unlike alcohol, so if you took an alcoholic, you took someone who's drinking 20 alcoholic beverages a day, and they've been doing that forever, and you stop them, they will die. They will get something called delirium tremens, and they will die a horrible cardiac death. They will break into arrhythmias, and they will die. So when we had alcoholics in the hospital, let's say we had to operate on somebody who happened to be an alcoholic, we would actually just put them on an ethanol IV. We weren't even trying to detox them. We just wanted to make sure they didn't die and go into these delirium tremens. But heroin, an opiate, is not like that. It is not physiologically lethal to stop cold turkey. It's just unbearable. And so I was like, I'm going to do it. So against her better judgment, I just stopped one day. And she could not have been more right. It was the darkest, I can laugh about it now. It was the darkest month of my life.
It was a month?
Oh, at least. I would just sit on a park bench for the whole afternoon. Complete flat affect.
But it's all mental? It's not a physical thing?
No, there's physical stuff going on. But no, it's you sort of, opiates make you itch like crazy. You get constipated. So there's a reversal of a whole bunch of physical stuff. But the biggest thing is the craving and the depression. And so the depression of coming off this thing was brutal. In many ways, and I don't tell that story to say, well, look at how special I am that I detox. That's not the point at all. I had two things going for me that virtually no junkie has going for them, right? The first is I didn't have a network of people around me that were doing the same thing. So I was sort of the only guy doing it. So for me to go and be around my friends was to be around people who weren't doing this. We always used to joke that if you really want to kick a heroin habit, you have to get a whole bunch of new friends. Like you don't get to decide you're not doing heroin and then go back and hang with your friends that are doing heroin. You need to watch Trainspotting to learn that. The second thing, and perhaps the more important thing, is I finally did connect with a doctor who was able to put me on the right path. So I had ended up going back to the operating room probably half a dozen times over the course of the year to have all these problems corrected. And then I found something else to fixate on, which was physical therapy. So I started to, even though it didn't seem like exercise, it wouldn't seem like exercise today. At the time, it was the first activity I was able to do. And so, within 6 months, I could walk a reasonable distance again. And so I would be spending 3 hours a day at physical therapy just doing the most trivial exercises. But basically the root cause of my depression was getting better. So that's really the only reason I think I was able to kind of detox off this stuff. Whereas I think for many people, A, it's not clear what the root cause is, or B, it's not getting better if it is clear. And so that's why I think it's a brutal addiction.
And it seems like also you had a future. Right, you had a life. You were in medical school. You're gonna, you're gonna do something. Whereas a lot of these people that are drug addicts, what do they? They have no life that they're looking forward to. They're just looking forward to nothing.
Absolutely. And so in February of that senior year, when I had to submit my rank list, I think we match in March. I misspoke earlier. I was still not functional perfectly. There was no way in February of 2001 that I could have withstood a surgical residency. But I had to make a decision at that point, which was, will I be ready on July 1st? And if I won't be, I should not submit my rank. I should defer a year, sit out a year in medical school, whatever. And I remember that was the hardest decision I had to make. And I just gambled. I was like, you know what? I'm going to be ready, and I'm going to make it happen no matter what. And so I submitted, matched, and then in addition to now reading The Corner to prepare for Baltimore and reflecting on my own sort of struggle with addiction, which was completely fresh in my mind, I'm also rehabbing like it's my day job, and going through most people take the last quarter of med school off, but I didn't have the ability to do that now because I had to go straight through till graduation day because I'd missed so much time during my injury. So when I showed up in Baltimore a couple of days before July 1st, it still wasn't crystal clear to me that I could go, 2 days without sleeping, stand in an OR for 8 hours at a time, all those sorts of things.